During one gloomy day, in what looks like an abandoned hospital located deep in the woods, a boy named Ryen Desauk is seen going through what seems like a bunch of medical records. Quite perplexed by what he had just discovered, he immediately threw the record to the wall. As he starts to break down due to the heavy emotions he is feeling right now, the boy froze in fear as he heard footsteps coming closer towards the room he is in. It seems like Ryen is experiencing a series of unnatural events, and right now, he is being hunted by the monster he is running away from. As the room creaked open, the boy had already accepted his fate and didn't even try to fight back. A dark floating entity then comes closer to him. Although the image of the creature's face is a blur, it is quite obvious that it is in the form of a girl with long hair. With such a defeated look on his face, if possible, Ryen asks the creature to take it easy on him, as it would really make him happy. However, the creature didn't even dare to do what Ryen had asked her to do. Instead, she went on to grind the boy's flesh into pieces without hesitation, using her long, sharp fangs. Then all of a sudden, the girl's figure suddenly morphed into a spider-looking creature. And at this point, the boy knows he is already done for. But this creature is not someone unfamiliar to Ryen. In fact, he still remembers his first meeting with this thing. If his memory serves him right, he vividly remembers that he first saw this thing during the summer of his first year in this village after he left his hometown. During one sunny day in Ryen's dorm, his noisy air conditioning suddenly woke him up. He tried fixing it, but it seems like it is clogged because of the massive spider living inside it. Since it's still early in the morning, Ryen decided to freshen up and prepare for school first. While at it, he couldn't help but wonder about the spider inside his room. With a size like that, he knows that it shouldn't come from the air conditioning. However, since he couldn't do much about it now, and he still has school to think of, the boy decided to shrug that thought for now. As he was about to watch the news to check on some updates regarding the new case of missing Kusunoki Seigo, a professor at Washo University, he suddenly noticed something odd. When he checked the side of his bed, he was surprised to see that it was now covered with spider webs. However, this just doesn't add up since he was certain it wasn't there yesterday. He couldn't seem to believe it was even possible in the first place. The fact that this massive spider that came out of nowhere made this happen in just 1 or 2 hours while he was sleeping is indeed something amazing yet scary at the same time. But since he doesn't have much time anymore, Ryen rushes to go to school and even goes on to jokingly bid goodbye to his newly found spider pet. At first, he thought that the spider would just leave on its own. However, the battle between him and the spider continued for a while. The spider web would appear every day without fail where he could see it. At this point, he was starting to get a bit worried and curious as to what kind of spider this was anyway. So he ended up looking up articles and books about spiders in the university library. But to his dismay, it was in vain. Since he is having a hard time researching about this creature, Ryen gives up in the end. After all, for humans, no matter what happens, one just has to experience it several times to get used to it, but for how long will he need to experience it anyway? Days have passed, and Ryen has been getting used to the spider living with him in his apartment. As he got home from work, he immediately checked the news to find out that another case of disappearance in Tokyo had occurred once again. Based on what's indicated in the headlines, it seems like the missing girls' school is actually quite close to Ryen's dorm. His pondering about these missing cases was suddenly abrupted when his alarm sounded. It seems like he has plans to have a date with his girlfriend today. He has been in a relationship with Kyoko for a month now, and Ryen personally feels like it is finally time for him to deepen their connection even further. As he packed his bag to leave, he was suddenly stopped by something. To his surprise, it's actually some web. Thinking this was just an accident, Ryen ended up leaving his dorm nonetheless. Little did he know, someone was quite angry at him in the shadows. After a little drive, he and his girlfriend finally made it to the aquarium. Ryen looks really happy seeing his girlfriend happy. Kyoko, who looks rather innocent and quite couldn't help but get amazed by the whole place. She even went on to state that staying here feels like they are at the bottom of the sea or something. Since this is one of Kyoko's dream places to visit, the happiness in her sparkling eyes is definitely apparent no matter what angle you look at her. Seeing Kyoko somehow makes Ryen wonder why this lovely girl is even his girlfriend. And if he is going to be a little honest about it, he still can't believe it. At this point, Ryen starts to wonder what it is that this girl liked about him anyway. Since Ryen is literally zoning out at the moment, Kyoko went on to tell him that she is really worried about his state right now. On top of that, Kyoko also went on to start up the conversation since, as she remembers, Ryen did mention a while back that he had something to talk about with her. However, since this is a rare date for the two because of how hectic their individual schedules are, Kyoko encourages Ryen to brush his worries off for now and just have fun. And just as Kyoko stated, Ryen did enjoy the date to make more fun memories with his cute new girlfriend. As the night finally came, after dropping Kyoko at the station, Ryen immediately walked back home. On his way to the dorms, he couldn't help but feel a bit flustered at what had just happened to their day. Since this was the first time he and Kyoko had a whole day with one another, Ryen couldn't help but be happy about it. However, his joy suddenly changed to confusion when he got home. To his surprise, the front door to his apartment is now covered with spider webs. Since this almost tripped him over, Ryen's good mood suddenly disappeared within a second. However, it seems like the worst is yet to come. At first, he thought that the spider webs were just at his front door. But to his surprise, as he finally made it inside his apartment, his whole place was now literally covered in webs. Until now, it has never been this bad. On top of that, this is quite unbelievable considering the amount of web that is impossible to appear within the few hours he was away. On top of that, as he went on to check on the webs, he was quite surprised to see that they are much different than before. It's as if when one is angry, they express their dissatisfaction by messing up everything around them, and this web gives off that kind of energy indeed. But to make the situation even more eerie than it already is, Ryen even managed to discover a human hair among the webs. Since this is quite a big deal, Ryen couldn't help but overthink about it for now. Even though he tried gaslighting himself into thinking that everything is alright and that he is just imagining things, Ryen is certain he is afraid right now. However, everything doesn't add up at all. He hasn't really confirmed any intruders coming inside the house. On top of that, he couldn't really say if the spider was still in his apartment. But knowing that the window was properly closed, Ryen is somewhat certain that the spider is still inside his room. But what really worries him right now is the fact that he saw a real human hair lying around his place. However, since he is alone in this big apartment, Ryen tried convincing himself that the web was just dirty, which is why it looked like hair. When he finally calmed down, Ryen decided to sleep already, hoping everything would turn out alright the next day. However, to his surprise, as he is about to close his eyes, the wind breezes through his bedroom window, and a black silhouette in the shape of a girl suddenly appears right in front of his eyes. Scared for his life, Ryen immediately shouted, "Who is there?" To his surprise, a girl with long black silky hair then shows up. Her beauty is definitely undeniable, and Ryen was mesmerized immediately. The girl's red, shiny eyes captivated Ryen in many ways he never expected. Then to his surprise, he didn't even notice or feel that the girl was literally bending over to him, seemingly trying to seduce him. Without any warning, the girl went on to kiss Ryen's neck, licking it with her wet tongue. Ryen was rather shocked by what was happening and is still trying to process everything. Considering the girl is still in her school uniform, Ryen tries to be as gentle as possible with her, as she may have been going through something, which is why he ends up in his apartment. However, it seems like Ryen made the wrong decision doing so since the girl is now starting to bite him with her fangs. To make it even more worse, it seems like she is sucking his blood continuously. At this point, Ryen tried to scream for help, but it seemed like he couldn't bring himself to do so. Sucking his blood is one thing, however, Ryen actually starts to feel that there is something entering his body. As he was forcing the girl to stop, the girl suddenly kissed him directly on the lips. Ryen, who is still shocked at what is happening now, couldn't move an inch. However, even if he wanted to stop kissing this girl, or even do more provocative actions to her, Ryen suddenly realized that he couldn't control his body anymore, like literally. His body is now moving by itself, and it seems like the girl is pretty much enjoying it. Ryen tried to fight back as he didn't want to do this act out of his own free will. On top of that, he feels like if he doesn't fight, he is betraying Kyoko and their relationship with one another. For a good minute or so, Ryen and the girl kept making out. But for a minute, Ryen's control over his body came back, so he immediately grabbed the chance to escape this odd situation. However, before he can even leave his apartment, the girl manages to stop him using her webs, and then again, Ryen's control over his body vanished once more. At this point, the girl made sure not to let go of Ryen no matter what. And to make it even worse, they started making out once again. During these moments, Ryen had no power to even fight back. But what hurts his feelings right now is the fact that he actually starts to somewhat enjoy the whole thing. He starts to find the girl beautiful and charismatic. but he knows this beautiful face is not a human, but a monster. Meanwhile, while Rei is literally suffering right now, in other news, the dead body of a second-year student named Maebara Yuko living in Ashinosaka City, who has been missing for some time, has been discovered. According to the news, there was something strange about the body itself. All organs, including the brain, have been removed. The police are currently investigating this horrible murder, but the question is, will they be able to know the truth behind her death? But for Rei, it was at that moment. This charming monster, with a foreign body that evokes fear, caught him, and he was unable to move or even fight for his safety. The next day at the police department, police officer Desauk Ono went on to see Mr. Matsui Yoshiaki, the leading forensic specialist of the department, to get some of the results of the said autopsy. However, to his dismay, even the lead specialist couldn't even create a conclusion on what really happened to Maebara. It seems like this is the first time Matsui has even seen this kind of unidentifiable body. No matter how much effort they give, they can't seem to determine the original appearance of the said missing girl. The internal organs are missing. Parts of bones have been cut off, only one arm and one leg remained, and just a thin part of skin was still connected to the body. Just thinking about it gives anyone the creeps indeed. Maebara's dead body was like the remains of a wild animal's meal. Based on Desauk's theory, in order to prevent the murder weapon from being determined, the murderer must have devoured a large part of her body to prevent them from knowing more. Although that is arguably the most plausible theory, but unfortunately, they can't seem to prove that right now. At this point, they can't really say anything for sure. Whether it's the scene or the corpse, they haven't found any traces that would match an animal at all. Even if an animal had eaten her and erased its traces, it is also impossible to prove this theory. Matsui is certain that the cause of death is probably due to excessive blood loss. In the alley at the crime scene, they found a blood stain. So at this point, there is a lot of angle as to the main cause of Maebara's death. So just to be sure, Matsui would like to continue investigating even more. Since, if he is going to be a little honest in his opinion, he personally thinks that this is the work of a ghost or a monster at the very least. However, Officer Desauk can't bring himself to believe such superstitions. So instead of diving more into that theory, he just went on to get the autopsy report from Matsui and left. Before leaving, Desauk reminds Matsui to contact him immediately as soon as he makes any further discovery about the case. When Desauk finally left, Matsui was left alone to wander by himself. He is quite certain that what happened to Maebara is not the work of a human being at all. As he zoned in on his office ceiling, he was surprised to see a spider right above him. Then he remembered that he had seen a lot of them today for some reason. Since Matsui felt like he had done enough work for the night, he immediately packed up and went straight to the door to finally head home and get some sleep. But something eerie awaits him behind the door. As he turned the knob, he was surprised to see that thousands of spiders are waiting for him on the other side of the door. Then, within a split second, Matsui ended up dying without even having the chance to fight back. Meanwhile, back to Rei. It seems like the sun is already shining, yet he is still stuck with the girl who's been playing with his body the whole night. No matter how much Rei tries to move, his body is kept in a lying position despite his efforts. His blood is being sucked by her, and after that he feels something entering his body. They have been repeating this routine for several days now. At this point, Rei just accepted his fate. When the girl is finally done doing whatever it is she is doing with his body, Rei tries to ask her, or even just talk to her to understand why she is even doing all of these in the first place. However, despite his efforts, it seems like the girl doesn't even understand a word he says. Although not establishing communication isn't good considering Rei's state right now, he has a more serious problem to take care of. So while the girl is still clinging to his side, Rei went on to turn on the TV to watch some news. It seems like Rei was already aware of the news regarding Maebara. According to him, on the second morning after he met her, he saw the news. During that time, Rei's heart almost stopped in fear. This girl, who is tightly hugging him right now, has the same face as the victim in the news. But this doesn't just add up. According to the news, Maebara is already dead. So how the hell is she here with Rei? And that is the only question in Rei's mind right now. Rei starts to formulate some theory inside his mind. Is this Maebara's sister? Or maybe this is someone who goes to the same school and looks exactly like her. However, there is no way that is even possible. That is why, if that were the case, this girl shouldn't be standing in front of him with such carelessness right now. But the victim wore exactly the same uniform as this girl, and their faces match each other perfectly. At this point, Ryen finally realizes that something is definitely wrong. Before he even realizes it, they are back at it again. Ryen couldn't control his body, and the girl lay on top of him once again. But this time around, Ryen managed to notice something. If he is not mistaken, he thinks he saw the illusion of a giant spider. Ryen's body now belongs to this girl, and no matter what he does, he can't seem to rebel against her. As he was pinned to the bed, frozen, and couldn't even move an inch, the girl then started her nightly rituals once again. Meanwhile, on the news, the newscaster went on to announce that Yoshiaki Matsui, a 38-year-old man who lives in the police prefecture, has been missing for 20 days now, and we all know what happened to him indeed. On the other hand, Ryen, in the last couple of days, showed no signs of resistance. But no matter what he does, he can't seem to escape this woman. No matter how many times he tried, his body was manipulated by a mysterious force that brought him back to the room, and he also tried to keep this monster locked out of his room. However, no matter what he did, the very next moment she was back to her previous position. Even calling for help was pointless because she would always hide when the police arrived. That is why, right now, Ryen finds himself every day with this monster, smiling while embracing him. At this point, the only thing that's inside Ryen's mind is to know the truth as to what this monster's real intentions really are. When she sucks on his blood, could it be because she is drawing her energy from it, are some of Ryen's unanswered questions. On top of that, when that girl kisses him, he can't seem to move his body at all. And all of a sudden, her kisses get more intense day after day. Then, during one of their sessions, Ryen received a call from Kyoko. Immediately, he went on to answer the phone. On the other side of the line, we can hear through Kyoko's voice that she is pretty much angry at Ryen for not going to school these past weeks. Ryen tried to calm her down. However, it seems like Kyoko couldn't help doing so since Ryen has been ignoring her messages for the past days as well. Aside from her, Ryen's other friends are also starting to get worried about him. Kyoko's voice really shows she is so worried about him, so Ryen made it clear to her that he is fine. He then started making up excuses as to why he wasn't able to attend school or message them. And that is because he wasn't feeling well, and he didn't want to worry everyone. Kyoko then angrily tells him that it makes her more worried if he doesn't contact her at all. Hearing Kyoko in distress because of him really aches Ryen's heart. However, he doesn't really have a choice considering there are still a lot of things he needs to worry about. Despite him not wanting to lie to Kyoko, but it would be impossible to explain this situation to her. However, Ryen was not expecting the next events that would happen. Since Kyoko was near his apartment, Kyoko suggested that she should at least come visit him. And since she is really worried about his health, she even offered to stay with him for the day to take care of him. Although this is such a sweet move, the timing is just not right for Ryen. At the back of Ryen's mind, if Kyoko comes here, and now, it would be the end of their relationship. While Ryen is stressing out, thinking of more excuses to tell Kyoko just to prevent her from coming, the monster girl looks rather happy, maybe thinking that this is the perfect time to execute her plan of breaking this couple no matter what. Back to Ryen, as he tries to think of more excuses, it is already too late since Kyoko is already at his front door. She immediately entered the unit and offered to make him some lunch. But since she is planning to spend the night here, Kyoko plans on entering his room to change. Immediately, Ryen tried to stop her. At this point, Kyoko is starting to get suspicious and even went on to ask him if there is something she shouldn't see inside. Kyoko stayed silent for a good minute or so. Then, with a flustered look, she went on to tease Ryen that since he wasn't in a good physical state, maybe he was looking at some lewd stuff, Kyoko speculated. But she immediately assured him that there is no need to worry since she is a woman who is able to understand this kind of thing. But as a girlfriend, she would want to know her boyfriend's sexual state. And immediately, Kyoko opened the door and rushed into his room. Ryen then starts to get worried, telling her that it is very dangerous inside. But to their surprise, there was nothing inside the room. While Kyoko is having a bath, Ryen is left in wonder as to where that girl could be. Of course, it looks like it's temporarily impossible to find her silhouette now. This made him wonder if that monster instinctively hides when another person visits. But to make sure Kyoko doesn't get worried about him, Ryen tried to calm himself down for now. After a couple of minutes, Kyoko finally finishes taking a bath, and to her surprise, she finds out that Ryen is actually reading a journal about the case of serial murders in their area right now. Kyoko then shared some of the information she has about the case. Based on what she has heard, the culprit who had been captured is actually innocent. That is why everyone in town is now worried once again, as the area is not safe to roam around alone anymore. Kyoko also added that based on her observations, the murderer has a high school student among the victims of the murder. In this case, all internal organs have been removed. This shocked Rei, as there is no way that would be even possible. Since they already finished eating and all, Kyoko suggested that they should head to bed now. However, the next turn of events is definitely something Rei wasn't expecting to happen. As they lay flat in bed, the warmth of Kyoko's body really felt in the bed. Despite her innocent-looking face, Kyoko seems to be excited to be in the same bed as Rei. While Kyoko is trying to shove her body toward Rei, on the other hand, looks rather flustered. Although this is indeed a normal thing for couples to do, because of that monster, he has to be extremely vigilant. So when Kyoko tried to initiate the first move to finally do the thing with Rei tried his best to stop Kyoko from pushing any further. It is not because he doesn't want to, but because at times like this, the monster appears. As the girl monster is about to take Kyoko away from Rei goes on to hug Kyoko tightly, while shouting and begging the monster to stop what it is she is about to do. Since Kyoko doesn't know anything about what's happening to Rei right now, she immediately concluded that it was for her. Fortunately, because of what Rei did, the monster disappeared immediately. However, it seems like Kyoko's feelings are now more shattered than ever. Due to the embarrassment she felt, she immediately packed her things up and said goodbye to Rei tried explaining himself. However, Kyoko was already so embarrassed that she didn't even want to look him in the eyes. Kyoko then went on to state that she just wanted to freshen up her thoughts. She then expresses her feelings, stating that Rei was right. It's true that it's still early for them to do something like that. She understands that maybe she was just in too much of a hurry. However, Rei tried to make her feel better by explaining himself further. But it seems like Kyoko was too embarrassed to have a nice conversation with him. But before leaving, Kyoko made sure that Rei didn't feel any guilt and assured him that there was no need to worry. She also hopes that Rei doesn't start hating her since she loves him so much. Rei also went on to express his love for her while tightly hugging her as she was about to step out the door. Although their day didn't end the way they wanted to, Kyoko tried to keep a straight face and just smile through the pain. Meanwhile, as soon as Kyoko left, Rei was left feeling guilty inside his gloomy apartment. And before he can even have the chance to just process the whole thing, the monster girl suddenly appears out of nowhere again. And as expected, she did the same thing to Rei that Rei couldn't even do to Kyoko. Meanwhile, on her way home, Kyoko feels a sense of relief after hearing that Rei doesn't really hate her. But after what happened, Kyoko made a decision to be more careful with her actions from now on. In the middle of the night, as she is walking down the streets of the town, Kyoko suddenly notices a spider web wrap around his wrist. Immediately, she removes it, thinking that maybe it just got caught when she was leaving Rei's apartment. However, for some reason, she suddenly felt a presence lurking in the shadows, seemingly looking at her. After all the disappearances in town lately, she immediately runs home without knowing that something bad will happen to her soon. Rei was always alone, and surely that will never change. It seems like back when he was in high school, something bad and traumatizing happened to him. During that time, a man named Akutsu Jr. tried to be friends with him, and let's just say, Akutsu was really of big help to him than he expected. Just those memories indeed make Rei wonder how life was harsh on him ever since before. Although he thought everything would pretty much change by now, the fact that this monster girl appeared out of nowhere and is ruining his life once again really made Rei wonder just how harsh this world could ever get. It has been weeks since this girl appeared, and it seems like Rei is starting to get irritated by how clingy she is. For the first time in a while, he went on to tell the girl to just stay away, even for just a minute, since all that she does is hug him every morning, yet she is still not satisfied. When he finally found the time to breathe, Rei immediately checked his phone to see if Kyoko had messaged him already. Thankfully, Kyoko started messaging him back, giving Rei a sense of relief since it seems that Kyoko no longer thinks about what happened last night. However, Rei still wants to apologize to her immediately and do something at the very least. But it seems like even doing that would be impossible considering this monster girl couldn't even last a minute without holding or clinging to Rei. In the end, Rei doesn't really know what this woman is thinking. Although they have pretty much been together for a week now, Rei still doesn't know anything about this girl, and the reason why is that she is even inside his room. He also doesn't know what it is that she is injecting into him when she is sucking his blood, and that is why her face is so identical to the girl who was killed a few weeks back. At this point, Rei has too many questions on her mind. since it is already hopeless to wait for this girl to speak. Ryen thought that maybe it's already time for him to investigate this girl's identity himself. On top of that, since he is also running out of food in the refrigerator, Ryen thought that maybe it was finally time to go for a run to the grocery store. Fortunately, Ryen managed to notice that this girl doesn't really seem to hate him at all. So he thought that maybe if he just begged her to let him go for now to buy some groceries, she would allow it somehow. However, it seems like the girl doesn't understand any words Ryen says. So to better explain where he is going, he tried to show her the map of the area and explain what he is going to do. But it seems like nothing is working at all. However, fortunately, Ryen managed to think of something outside the box. Since every time he chased her out of his house, she always came back to his room. That is why, just to survive, Ryen decided to just invite her to go out for now. After much observation, Ryen managed to notice that this girl always disappears when someone enters his room, like when Kyoko visited him at that time. It seems like this girl always disappears like smoke and never shows herself to anyone but Ryen. And if Ryen is not mistaken, it seems like this girl is afraid of others except him. That is why he ended up with the conclusion that from a human point of view, no one can see her other than him. With that being said, somehow, Ryen can finally go out and buy all the necessities he needs. At the grocery store, while Ryen is looking through the aisle, he bumped into an old friend, and it's none other than Junya. Since it has been a long time since they have seen each other, Junya decided to invite Ryen to his apartment to have a drink and just catch up a bit. While at it, Junya expresses how worried he is about Ryen since they never really see each other on campus anymore. On top of that, Ryen's face is also a bit pale too, as if he is sick or something. Little did Junya know his friend was literally being haunted by a monster in a cute young girl's appearance. Since this has been long time due catching up, Junya went all in and asked his friend about his relationship with Kyoko. Just like any other boy, Junya was curious if Ryen had already gone to kiss his girl during their aquarium date. Now that Junya has already mentioned it, Ryen starts feeling bad again as his relationship with Kyoko has been tarnished because of what he did to her last night. Thinking that his friend is just having a petty fight with his girlfriend, Junya tried to make Ryen feel okay, even for just a minute. He then starts boasting about how he is such an expert on love, and because of that, he will do everything to give Ryen some tips to make sure his next date doesn't go wrong anymore. Although Junya can sometimes be a little bit too much for some, Ryen is so thankful that he has him as his friend. The two then went on to talk for hours. Then suddenly Junya noticed that they were already out of cigarettes, so he immediately offered to go buy some. While Junya is at it, Ryen decides to just go outside the balcony and breathe some fresh air. There, the cold breeze of the night hugged his skin so tightly. Ryen then notices Junya's neighbor playing his guitar. While the man plays his instruments, with background music playing in the back, Ryen suddenly thought of the monster girl again. At this point, he starts to realize that maybe she will not reveal her appearance in places with many people. But the thought that this monster can just shapeshift into a creature and follow Ryen around kind of scares Ryen a little. With this thought in mind, Ryen is worried that he might never get out of this trap ever again. But the thought is that as long as he is with someone, maybe that monster won't show up again. Even for the moment, it's only his supposition, but Ryen is hoping that he'll never see her again. However, as soon as his heart started to ease, something unexpected happened. A spider suddenly appeared out of nowhere. This time around, he is going towards Junya's neighbor. But before Ryen can even act upon it, Junya arrives bringing fresh sets of cigarettes for them to enjoy. However, to make it even worse, Ryen immediately notices the spider web clinging to Junya's shoulder. At this point, he knows that no matter what he does, it will still not be enough to make that monster go away. Worried that his friend might get dragged into this nightmare, Ryen immediately asks Junya where he got that spider web. Junya immediately explained that he tried to take a shortcut on the way here, and he pretty got caught in a web. Ryen then starts to convince himself to calm down. After all, spiders, except that woman, don't scare him at all. So as long as it is not her, everything's fine, Ryen told himself. But it seems like his body language says otherwise. Things then started to spiral, and Ryen finds himself outside his apartment with a gruesome scene to witness. Dead bodies of dismembered human beings are scattered everywhere. Some don't have legs anymore, while some are just gruesomely crushed to death. But what really traumatized the hell out of Ryen is the image of his dead body being wrapped in spider webs. As the scene starts to intensify, Ryen suddenly wakes up from his nightmare. It seems like he was just dreaming a while back. After drinking that much alcohol for the night, both Junya and Ryen were literally knocked out. However, despite Junya accompanying Rei, the girl nonetheless went on to do her nightly routine with Rei. As she starts to suck on Rei's blood out in the balcony, Junya managed to wake up and ask his friend what he is doing. Confused at what is happening, Junya immediately checks on Rei. However, it seems like Rei has already lost his mind and is now in deep despair and desperation to get away from that monster, no matter what. But since Junya doesn't really know what is happening to him, he just tries to calm his friend down. At this point, Rei is starting to panic attack. But to make it worse, it seems like the monster is starting to learn how to speak. Knowing how grave the situation is now, Rei immediately decided to leave, as this may have caused his friend a lot of harm. When asked by Junya what was going on, Rei just went on to state that something urgent had come up and that he had to go now. Rei now finally understands that he can't simply solve this problem by staying with others. So to make sure he doesn't leave his friend hanging, he just went on to state that the situation he is currently in is beyond words. Without even saying his proper goodbye, Rei immediately rushes out and is now on the way back home. At this point, the thought of also staying away from Kyoko crossed his mind as well. It seems like Rei doesn't want to cause his friends and loved ones any more trouble. Since, based on the looks of it, this monster is no ordinary one, and is definitely so dangerous to mess with. As he passed by the playground, it seemed like Rei's speculations were right after all. To his surprise, the same neighbor who was singing beside him a while ago is now dead. His body is tied and hanged in the playground grills. To make it worse, part of his internal organs were also removed without any trace, just like what happened to Mibara. Now that everything is finally making sense, Rei starts to feel sick to his stomach. As he starts to think of it, there was also a strange murder involving a high school girl where all the internal organs were removed. And at this point, Rei finally knows who the culprit is of all these mysterious murders. Since this is now getting out of hand, Rei decided to talk to his uncle, who turned out to be police officer Desauk, about the murders. During dinner, Desauk prepared some hot pot for the two of them to enjoy as they talked about murders. As soon as Rei finally got the chance to talk to his uncle, he immediately asked him about any news about the happenings in town lately. Desauk immediately showed a defeated look on his face, stating that they are starting to get a bit hopeless of getting any chance of actually catching this serial killer. On top of that, it seems like Desauk is also getting criticized by the chief for pointing his nose and risking his life on the front lines. Desauk also finds the people at the forensics department were also foolish. At this point, Desauk can't deal with eating this nice-looking hot pot because of the murders. But that set aside for now, Desauk then wonders why Rei is even curious about the murders. But since it seems like his nephew is really into it, Desauk just went on to tell him everything he knows about the case. In this case, there were 6 people, including the victim Rei found. The first victim is an honorary member of the Okada Shingo 37 construction company. The cause of death seems to be an industrial machine, so it wasn't really talked about by the people at first. Then the second victim appeared, Mibara Yuko, age 17. A few days before the body was found, the police received a missing person search report. The report said all the internal organs had been removed, but it is not easy to say in a few words. And based on the description in the reports, the victim's body, well, it was as if she were preyed upon by some monstrous creature. According to Desauk, he finds that incident so strange as well since the forensics claim that it is the result of a ghost or monster attacking a human being. To make it worse, Desauk then went on to continue stating that the other bodies are just as bad as the rest. The third victim's hands and feet were cut off and placed in the atrium of a university. The fourth victim is surrounded by his limbs like it were a magic ritual, and the torso was also holding his severed head. Meanwhile, every part of the fifth victim's body was dissected evenly and then scattered on the road with no care whatsoever. And then there's the sixth victim. Hearing all of these horrific descriptions, Rei then went on to ask his uncle if there was a chance that these murders were caused by the same person. Now that Rei has already mentioned it, Desauk then suddenly remembered that there seems to be a link with the murder of the second and subsequent victims. All the victims after the subsequent murders were similar to Mibara's case, where all internal organs were removed. Several organs, including the brain, were taken from the 4 other victims. 1 or 2 organs were missing, and the only one missing is Mibara Yuko. The third victim had the stomach taken, while the fourth had his liver taken, and the fifth victim had its lung and kidneys taken. Despite all of these happenings being odd and unimaginable, no one really knows what the motive of the murderer is. If it is a mad killer or a pervert with an organ fetish, Desauk is certain that there is no way it could be the doings of a ghost or a monster, as everyone in the office tries to tell him. However, it seems like Ryen already knows the truth, that these murders were not done by any human being, but instead an entity that tries to look like one. Ryen is certain that as soon as his uncle arrives, the monster disappears and hides somewhere. Or maybe there's something more to this story than what Ryen had thought of. But since he is still not sure about anything, Ryen tries to keep everything he knows to himself, as he is also sure that his uncle will not believe him that easily. As they were about to dig in with the food, Desauk suddenly got a call from someone. It seems like the 7th victim has been discovered. As his uncle left, Ryen started to feel a little guilty about it. He then starts to state that he feels a bit sorry for his uncle. Although he can't say anything about the murder case, Ryen is certain that this monster might have something to do with the murders for sure. As soon as his uncle left his apartment, Ryen immediately went to his bedroom. And just as expected, the girl is waiting for him inside. As she went on to give him a hug, Ryen couldn't help but wonder what this woman even did before she came here. When the neighbor was killed, the news came out that the 7th victim was gone. And during that time, Ryen couldn't find any trace of this woman. At this point, he actually starts to wonder if this is all just a coincidence, or maybe he is just overthinking things a little too much. Although there is almost no evidence to confirm that yet, Ryen doesn't know what to do with this woman. But if she dares to hurt his loved ones, Ryen would not even hesitate to kill her. Just what this woman does to him every day, they are at it again today. This time, it seems like she is getting a bit intense with her moves, and Ryen couldn't help but feel uncomfortable with it. Ryen is already hopeless at this point. The fact that he is being manipulated by this woman, mimicking what lovers do to each other, really is the worst. And the fact that he didn't even do this first to Kyoko, his real girlfriend, made the feeling even worse. However, no matter what he does, he can't seem to fight it at all. While he trembles in fear and anger, this girl is literally trembling with joy. Meanwhile, somewhere in the university, Kyoko and Junya were able to bump into each other in the same class. Since this is the only time they would be able to talk with one another, Junya immediately grabbed this opportunity to ask Kyoko about Ryen. While she is working on one of her paintings, Junya went on to inform her that he had happened to meet Ryen the other day and invited him to his house for a drink. But the next series of events that spiraled really shocked Junya to the core. He tried to summarize everything to Kyoko, stating that Ryen was acting a bit weird that day. On top of that, they're finding that the murdered victim made the whole situation even worse than it already is. Seeing the worry in Kyoko's eyes, Junya immediately assured her that Ryen is fine and that the police have already done their questioning. Although witnessing that dismembered body was already traumatizing for Junya, but seeing how distressed Ryen was that night just made him wonder what the hell is actually going on. No matter how they think about it, the way Ryen acted was definitely a little strange, and Kyoko also cannot deny that fact. The day when she visited him at his apartment, she also felt the same strange feeling about Ryen. Usually, when someone visits and enters a room, feeling an intense, eerie vibe is not that common. However, when Kyoko entered Ryen's room, that is exactly what she felt. Ryen is known by everyone as the happy-go-lucky guy who always smiles, but all of a sudden, he was just afraid. For some reason, Kyoko and Junya managed to notice that Ryen suddenly became strange, and he was absolutely terrified of something. And if they are not mistaken, this behavior just started 2 weeks ago, as it happened to be the day the authorities found the 3rd victim of the strange murder. Since Ryen's situation is now getting a bit out of hand, Kyoko decided to pay him a visit after class just to check up on him. Junya also feels like that would be a great decision since there is a chance that if they didn't run regularly to see him, he might be the next one that would disappear all of a sudden. All in all, the two know that they can only do what they can do now, and there is no other way to do that. But for now, since they are still working on their project for art class, Junya went on to observe Kyoko's work. Kyoko then went on to explain that this painting is not just a forest bath, but an expression of air. For Kyoko, it is not just in the air that everything in the world is made up of. So for her, expressing the composition of those components in color is his favorite way of painting. The gray part in her painting is oxygen, while the yellow is carbon dioxide. On top of that, it seems like there are many other tiny particles scattered around as well, and Kyoko is planning to draw them in as much detail as possible. As they continued to chit-chat, Junya's gaze suddenly went wide when he saw a bunch of eerie paintings hidden behind the curtains. As he went on to take a closer look at it, He was surprised to see that they were rather gory rather than creative. Kyoko then explained that this is the work of Fujitang, one of the students here. Based on what she knows, he often paints this kind of eerie work. It seems like for that man, death and destruction are symbols of life and creation. Although in itself subjects for this kind of painting are quite common for the artistic minds, after seeing how one of the paintings looks exactly like the image of Junya's neighbor's dead body, it shocked the hell out of Junya. Immediately, Junya went on to ask Kyoko how to contact this guy named Fujitang, as he wanted to ask him something important. During one sunny day, Rei and his big brother went fishing. As they were about to head home, something beyond their wildest dreams happened. Rei's older brother got stabbed mercilessly by an unknown man as his brother tried to save him. Rei then just looks at his dying brother's body, wishing that it should just be him who should have died. His brother then starts asking him why he is the one alive, why not both of them? As Rei starts to feel more distressed, he suddenly finds himself waking up from his dream. Realizing that it was just one of his nightmares, Rei was immediately relieved. He knows well that his big brother is not the kind of person who would say such a thing. As he starts to feel a bit down, the monster girl went on to touch him, seemingly trying to comfort him. At first, he tried to stop her from doing so. However, the girl ended up using her power to force him to stay still. However, to Rei's surprise, instead of making him feel uncomfortable or what, this girl's action actually helped him a little bit. For the first time in a while, Rei finally opened up to someone about what he truly felt about the incident a few years back. It seems like he is experiencing survivor's guilt almost all the time for being able to continue living while his brother was dead. For him, his big bro was such a great person, definitely liked by everyone in the community. Just like how it made everyone feel bad, Rei also felt as if he was the one to blame for his brother's tragic death. During the time when he was rescued, instead of checking up on him, his parents ended up asking him why he was the one who survived. And at that point, he realized it was because of his brother that he wasn't able to get the love of others. Afterwards, the others just looked at him with that silent stare, causing him not to bond with anyone ever again. The only one whom he felt really cared for him was his uncle Desauk, who lived in Tokyo. For the longest time, Rei felt like he was alone. It was hard for him. He was lonely most of the time, and he would lie if he pretended he was strong at that time. Hearing all of this somehow made the monster sympathize with him. And surprisingly, she actually tried to comfort him by assuring him she is always there to support him from now on. When Rei moved to this new city, he finally got a girlfriend and a friend. And these are the people who are just too good for him, he feels. This is why, for the first time, Rei asks this girl nicely to just give him back his daily life again. However, it seems like it will not happen sooner or later. Over the next few days, Rei ended up getting used to living with this girl. Ever since Uncle Desauk came home that day, he actually started watching the monster's movements while he slept at night. The suspense of that day was that she basically never left him for even a moment. But occasionally, she would disappear for a long time, and then, hours later, there was no doubt that the bodies of the victims of these strange murders were found. The third case happened immediately after Kyoko came to his house, while the others just happened while he was away as well. Although Rei has just started to get confirmation of that theory, considering it has just been 5 days since his surveillance began, Rei tries to be as discreet as possible. However, no matter how much he tries to observe her, there seem to be no special signs to watch out for. In fact, it just seems like she wants to tease him all night. Looking at this monster's beautiful face caused Rei to remember that this woman is not the real Maebara. If it were that monster that attacked her and ate her organs, there is a big chance that this monster's staple food is not just human blood. Her actions toward him are just odd and confusing. At the back of Rei's mind, if this monster needs to hunt other victims for food, then why hasn't she killed Rei yet? After the day Rei found out that his theory was right about this girl, he tried to be as cautious as he could. If a new victim appears today or tomorrow, she has a high probability of being guilty. Even if Rei wants to give her to the police, he knows that she'll just disappear out of thin air. That is why Rei plans on playing with her games, and once there's conclusive evidence already, he'll immediately get rid of her. As he tried doing so, he went on to pin her to the bed. For the first time, Rei was on top of her. However, this is not what you think of. Rei actually plans on strangling her to death. But when he realized killing this monster was the same as killing a person, Rei stepped back and tried to think twice about his actions. However, that would not be the case anymore as soon as Rei heard the news. It seems like a new victim has just been found, And it is not just any victim. Akutsu Junya, Rei's best friend, was found dead with his organs removed from his body. And at that point, Rei just went blank, and for the first time, he actually didn't hesitate to kill this monster once and for all. During this moment, Rei starts to reminisce about some of his memories with Junya. There was a time when he asked Junya why he was even trying to involve himself with someone like him. Since Rei is used to people hating him for what happened to his brother, he was expecting that Junya would also do the same. After all, Rei is also quite aware of the fact that he is gloomy and is afraid of others, so he doesn't really think he could say he has any merit at all. Hearing Rei say this caused Junya to feel a bit pissed off, since for him, hanging out with someone solely based on their merits or demerits is not friendship at all. But to assure Rei, Junya went on to explain to him the reason in the most creative manner possible. At this point, after hearing how down-to-earth and genuine Junya is to him, Rei couldn't help but feel happy about it and be thankful for the friendship he has shown him. That is why, after finding out that Junya is now dead, Rei couldn't help but express his anger towards this girl. Without hesitation, he went on to ask her if she was the one who killed him and the neighbors, too. But instead of answering, the girl just tried to reach out to him to hug him. However, Rei is not happy at the moment. He feels like he is being played by this woman. The fact that he just opened up to her about how important Junya and Kyoko are to him the other day, and yet she still did such a horrifying thing made Rei feel betrayed. Thinking that it must have been hard, it must have hurt, and it must have been terrifying for Junya makes Rei feel sick. The fact that Junya just got involved with him and this monster that binds him ended up costing him his life. It's just as if Rei killed him himself, making him feel more guilty for his best friend's death. And yet, before he knew it, he almost got swayed by his emotions towards this monster. If only he had realized earlier, he would have already gone all in. So for the first time, Rei went on to hit the girl with his hand, telling her to get away from him. It seems like he doesn't want her to touch him anymore, especially after knowing her hands were the same hands that killed Junya. However, despite him hitting her one after the other, the woman still didn't give up and still went on to hug Rei while trembling. But because of the anger he is feeling right now, Rei ended up hitting her a bit hard this time around. He knows that despite those innocent eyes, she is still a monster. The monster that sucks his blood night after night. The monster that feeds on human organs. The monster that killed Junya. However, despite the anger that Rei is feeling right now, after seeing how this girl cries as he hits her makes him feel guilty about his actions. At this point, Rei starts to remember what Junya told him before, that he is tyrannical and cold. Although he ended up beating her badly, the girl still managed to give him a smile. In fact, instead of fighting back, the girl just kissed him on the lips, reminding him that the love she has for him is definitely immeasurable. And thus, the girl then disappears. By bearing this enormous sacrifice and guilt in his heart, that Rei was able to recover his daily life. After that intense scene, Rei ended up sleeping because of too much stress. However, every time he wakes up, he still can't believe that his friend is now already dead. For him, that still doesn't sound like reality. After what happened, the girl also didn't show up for a while. During this moment, Rei starts to wonder by himself as to why that monster didn't even bother to use her power on him. On top of that, why is he even feeling emotional confusion right now? Then suddenly, he received a call from Kyoko. Without hesitation, he went on to answer it immediately. On the other side of the line, Kyoko sounds distressed, telling Rei that she wants to see him and talk to him immediately. However, not for the reason you may think of. Kyoko then said something that made Rei confused. On the call, while crying, she went on to state that she thinks she might be the one who actually killed Junya. Chapter 15. As soon as the call ended, Rei immediately headed to Kyoko to know what the hell was going on. As soon as Rei showed up, Kyoko rushed to hug him tightly, feeling a bit relieved. Since a lot has already gone on, they just went on to catch up with each other. During this time, Kyoko finally informs Rei about what she knows regarding the death of Junya. It seems like she is trying to tell Rei about Fujitang, considering he is the last person Junya went looking for. According to Kyoko, Fujitang is a strange type who draws creepy dead bodies as his subject for his paintings. About 1 week ago, Junya came to the art building to discuss Rei's situation. During this time, Kyoko finally informs Rei of how worried they are about him and how they were talking that day, thinking of a way to make him feel better. But during that time, Junya's face became pale when he saw the works of Shuichiro to do. And without hesitation, Junya went on to ask her about Fujitang's contact information, so Kyoko did. But to her surprise, Junya actually went there. Based on the last messages he sent Kyoko, it seems like he was already having a bad feeling about the whole situation. In fact, he already told Kyoko in advance that in case he doesn't make it back, she should immediately call the police. Kyoko then tried to contact Fujitang since Junya was murdered, but it seems like he locked himself inside his home. The police also went to search for evidence, but none was found, and he doesn't have that many links with the previous cases either. That is why Kyoko blames herself for everything. She just wished that she hadn't given Junya that contact info, and maybe he might still be alive now. Meanwhile, it seems like Rei doesn't really understand what the heck is happening. Why did Junya make such a big reaction after seeing the painting? To know why, Rei asks if he could see the painting she is talking about. And after hearing everything she said, Rei also wanted to have Fujitang's contact information as well. Kyoko then starts crying, telling Rei not to move forward with his plan. But Rei begged her, stating that Junya must have seen some kind of evidence that is linked to the murder in the painting. Since the police are useless, he will just have to find the truth himself, since he knows that finding the murderer of Junya is the only thing that he can do to mourn him. However, it seems like that would be impossible to do now since, ever since the death of Junya, the painting has been taken away. That just makes it even stranger. Taking the paintings away at this kind of time is definitely suspicious. So Rei had no choice but to just ask Kyoko if she happened to still remember what the painting looked like. Although she really doesn't want to remember that, Kyoko really tried her best. Based on what she remembers, she then describes the image. Some of the paintings showed a corpse being crushed by a digger. The other one, on the other hand, was a high school girl being cut open where the legs and arms are cut off just like a Russian doll. And after that, a body with magic formations on it or something is also painted. Just by the way Kyoko described it, Rei knew the paintings showed what the murdered victims looked like when they were found by the authorities. But what really shocked Rei to the core is the next painting that Kyoko is about to describe. A man had his right abdomen cut open, and he was tied to a pole one of the tortures. Now that he finally understands why Junya went to see that guy, Rei plans to do the same to know more about the incident. Without wasting a minute, Rei immediately went to Fujitang's apartment to talk to him. There, he immediately told him that he is interested in his artworks, especially the ones that have been on display at the art exhibition. Rei knows that his friend must have discovered something through his art that made him see him. If that is the reason that Junya was murdered, then Rei would not just ignore this and leave it to rot. Although this is such a risky gamble, but this is the only way he would be able to get closer to the truth. After hearing that Rei is interested in his works, Fujitang immediately took him to his private studio. The whole apartment was already eerie in itself. However, when they entered the studio, Rei was shocked to see such an uncanny sight. As soon as they got inside, the two sat down and went to have a talk. Fujitang went on to state that life and death are just like the two sides of a coin. Two parallel lines that can never intersect. Neither of them can ever suit both. Rei starts to get a bit impatient with this man, considering he has been repeating the same speech for over 3 times now. Based on how it looks, Fujitang has been in this state since the beginning. Even though he asked him about important topics, he kept escaping. He just keeps on excitedly talking about art like a lunatic. Fujitang then tells Rei to drink the tea he has prepared for him. At first, Rei was a bit hesitant to do so, considering he doesn't really know what substances this man might have mixed it with. But after realizing that Fujitang has been drinking the same tea in the same pot for a while now, he just went on to give it a try to somehow make Fujitang comfortable with him. To his surprise, the tea actually tasted quite good. Now that the air has finally calmed down, Rei decided to ask Fujitang all the questions he has in mind. He first started off asking about the paintings that were placed in the art building, and where they are now. Fujitang immediately answered him, stating that he couldn't simply accept those failures as his paintings, so he threw them away. Since, based on the looks of it, trying to creep around the topic doesn't work, Rei finally decided to be straightforward with it. Without hesitation, he went on to ask the guy about the serial murder case. As soon as Rei mentioned it, Fujitang's expression suddenly changed. Rei then continued stating that the artworks that were placed in the art building were very similar to those of the murder case, so he is asking Fujitang now if he can tell him anything he knows about the case. However, it seems like Fujitang's artwork has more to it than it seems. After hearing what Rei just said, Fujitang asks him if he really looked at his paintings. It seems like, since the beginning, Rei has had very little interest in his work. Since Rei understands where Fujitang is coming from, he went on to honestly state that he never really went through his paintings himself. Taking this chance, he'd like to admit that it was a lie that he had any interest in his artworks. The true reason that he came here is to investigate whether he has any connection with those murder cases. Also, he'd like to talk to him about the person who also came here just to talk to him, but subsequently ended up as a corpse the next day, referring to Junya. Fujitang finds Rei quite interesting, since not all people are willing to admit they are lying. But what's more surprising is the fact that he is even accusing him of murder. Although it is true that Rei has never seen them, but from what he heard from Kyoko, it's the same image of those victims. But what really intrigues Fujitang is the fact that Rei knows these things. When he was asked how he knew, Rei went on to admit that it is because he is the one who found the 5th case. As for the other cases, he asked around with someone he is close with, referring to his uncle Desauk about the case, hence why he knew more about the case than the rest of the town. So listening to these outlines, it creeps him out that all those paintings are exactly the same as what he saw in the 5th case. Although in reality the case Rei witnessed was the 6th case, he just wanted to see how this man would react to his queries or if he would bite into Rei's trap. According to Fujitang, he just made all those paintings as a representation of the art of death. So, to his defense, it was nothing special at all. He just did those paintings out of his urge to express his art. So it's probably the reason why his paintings are so similar to those cases. However, Rei is not satisfied with this yet. He then went on to add, asking what about the 3rd case. Fujitang then explains that it expresses the feelings of hopelessness after losing its 4 limbs. At that instant, the hope for living would be endlessly strong. Fujitang then went on to tell more about the case. For the 4th case, he stated that he was influenced by the works of Da Vinci, so he wanted to try to express those emotions. And by using the formation of the human body, Fujitang feels like it brings a fascinating taste to his art. So pretty, he is trying to say that he just drew those paintings that are similar to the cases unconsciously. So as to speak, it is completely unrelated to those cases. However, Rei finds it too strange. Since the 5th case, he witnessed that Fujitang's painting is so similar to the crime scene. Hearing Rei say this shocked the hell out of Fujitang. Rei then added that, based on the description Kyoko told him a while ago, the rest of his paintings are all the same. But how come he managed to guess correctly the situation in these cases so accurately? So if he isn't someone related to the crimes, he shouldn't know anything specific about the cases. Fujitang then went on to explain that this is all just a coincidence. However, Rei doesn't want to believe that, since not only the content but also the numbers are so accurate. With rage not firing up inside Rei, he couldn't stop himself from shouting as he asked Fujitang about what he did with Junya. For a good minute, Fujitang stayed silent until he finally confessed. He then stood up and went on to state some odd things, saying that, if the way is not used correctly, it is possible to summon a monster by accident. He then added by saying that the speed of his painting is limited to how fast his talent can go. What Fujitang showed next sends shivers down Rei's bones. As he went on to show him his newly made painting, Rei was stunned to see that it was none other than his friend Junya. Fujitang then added that curiosity kills the cat, and if he and Junya didn't notice these strange things, then they wouldn't have met a monster like him. So in conclusion, Fujitang is indeed the one behind the series of murders, together with what he calls the Black Clothes Goddess. And the next sacrifice is going to be Rei. Just as Rei feared, it turns out that Fujitang indeed spiked his drink with something. The paralyzing poison is supposed to work right away, but somehow it worked too slow, and even Fujitang was starting to get worried. But now that Rei couldn't even bring himself to move, it is now time for the pleasures of art to start once more. Fujitang went on to tease Rei around, saying that Junya's body is just too excellent. It wasn't overworked yet, it was the body of a professional athlete. He had the muscles and everything that a man should have. At that time, Fujitang was thinking, since it's down to this, he'll just have to strip him of his skin. So Fujitang took him captive, gagged and tied him up. Although it's true that Fujitang had no chance of beating Junya under normal circumstances. However, that fact only applies to normal circumstances. So he needed to think outside the box to capture this man. Using the small milk box Rei saw earlier, Fujitang managed to pull off his plan. The small box is designed to be easily opened, which is why it is easy to reseal it again once used. The milk inside is mixed with anesthetics, and neither Rei nor Junya thought that they would have poured the poison themselves. Fujitang vividly remembers that Junya even told him to go and turn himself in, and he never even gave that a single thought. Before he stepped onto the road of arts, Fujitang had always wanted to become a doctor. Since he attended lectures in the science department before, he has quite a knowledge of the structure of the human body. Due to these skills and knowledge, he was able to turn this talent into art, and Junya was definitely one of his masterpieces. Every time he skinned him, he would show him a pained expression which Fujitang loved to see. It was absolutely great when the blood of Junya started spraying everywhere. It seems like Fujitang is such a lunatic that he can change his mood in an instant. He felt disbelief ever since he was born. Why can organisms move? Where does the human spirit go? Are some of the questions he has in mind. That is why, due to his curiosity, he was able to claim his first victim. Insects and frogs, snakes and fish. Setting traps for this kind of being is something Fujitang loves doing, since this way he would be able to dissect them and explore their insides without worry. However, his fascination was something his parents were against. It was about when he was dissecting the cats and dogs in his house that his parents finally found out that their son's behavior was strange, and they educated him with abuse and violence in order to teach him. But what's ironic is that their teachings helped him learn many things. Those feelings of brutality never left him, and without himself noticing, he went to become a doctor who could do surgery on people under the law. Although now he is attracted to the beauty of exhibiting. If some mistakes weren't made, then maybe a person like him would have become a doctor. That is why he even wants to be called a monster instead. An artist that expresses man and death with simplicity and elegance, he now finally accepted that this is his destiny. Although Fujitang said those words to make Rei respect him, Rei instead showed nothing but disrespect. He just laughed at Fujitang's claims, saying he must be joking in some sort. To make it even more worse for Fujitang, Rei suddenly stood up, now completely unparalyzed. This shocked Fujitang since the anesthetics shouldn't have lost their effect yet. Although Fujitang claims that he is a monster and an artist, Rei personally thinks otherwise. For him, this man is not something of that caliber. He is merely trapped within his own fantasy. And instead of calling him a monster or an artist at the very least, it is more appropriate to call him a murderer. However, despite the events not going his way, Fujitang is still confident that he would be able to knock Rei down anyway. Until suddenly a ring on his doorbell stunned him, wondering who could it be. As it turned out, it's actually the police. Rei actually called Kyoko prior to their conversation, and everything that Fujitang stated was recorded and heard by the authorities. And just like that, Fujitang starts to scream, trying to ask for help about what entity it is he is seeing. Now that he has already lost his mind, he couldn't do anything anymore since the authorities are already at his front door. As he was getting handcuffed, Fujitang then went on to wonder why the black-clothed goddess left him behind. Even though he kept giving her offerings, how come she never came to his side? It has already been 3 days since the murderer Shuichiro Tadu, aka Fujitang, was locked away in prison. Under the invitation of Kyoko, Rei ended up in her room. On that day, after hearing about the situation, he was given a beating by his uncle, and he ended up shaking, going home. On the morning of the second day, he got a bunch of messages and calls from Kyoko. Even though she was a big help, he hadn't even met up with her until now. Since he badly made her so worried, Rei made sure to comfort her and assure her that this is the end of the chaos, and now Junya can finally rest in peace. However, despite the assurance that Fujitang is already locked away, Rei still couldn't help but wonder if the black-clothed goddess that the man is referring to is actually the same woman Rei has been seeing before. At the back of his mind, maybe, there is a connection between Fujitang and that monster. But for now, Rei doesn't want to worry about that yet. As much as possible, he tries to enjoy the moment and just be present with Kyoko. Since it has been a long time since the two have talked this long, Kyoko decided to cook Rei some lunch. They tease around and just talk for hours until finally Kyoko asks Rei if he would like her to turn on the TV. To their surprise, the newscaster went on to announce on a flash report that the suspect Shuichiro Tadu, aka Fujitang, of the serial murder cases, who was just captured recently, was found dead in custody. Hearing this shocked both Rei and Kyoko, as they weren't expecting that to come. According to the news, the police are under investigation in this case of self-harm. In the end, he even gave himself up to art. However, Rei still couldn't seem to understand why it had come to this. Kyoko then expressed a saddened look as he went on to state that some artists live in a world where people can agree with their work. However, some artists live in a place that most ordinary people can't understand. Ray couldn't seem to understand what was happening. Although he looked like he had no remorse, Ray still couldn't believe doing this would cause that man any happiness. Since it already passed, this stuff should no longer be important. Although Ray doesn't really know what this man is thinking, nor does he want to, but he definitely knows it has something to do with that woman. Even though he really wants to know more about the black-clothed goddess, she definitely doesn't have any attachment to this case. After the criminal was caught, Ray heard that the body was sent back to their family for the funeral. So as a final farewell to a friend, Ray planned on going to Jonya's funeral. Although it cost Jonya his life, Ray is happy that he has finally gone back to living normally. No monsters, no murders, just a peaceful life. However, he still couldn't brush off the fact that things will not be the same anymore. Seeing how traumatized Ray is, Kyoko tries her best to comfort him and assure him that everything's alright. When Ray thought everything was now coming back to pieces, something unexpected happened. Kyoko starts to say odd things, starting with telling him that she will not attend the funeral of Jonya. Ray thought that maybe she was still hung up about the case of Fujitang, so he tried to assure her that it was not her fault at all. However, the next thing that Kyoko would say would literally send shivers down Ray's body. According to her, that case didn't have much of a connection with that man. Since the truth is, Junya would definitely have hated to see her attend his funeral, as she was actually the one who took Junya's organs out. At that point, Ray finally realizes that it is not yet over. All this time, Ray thought that Kyoko was someone he could trust. However, it seems like she is far different from what he expected. After being hit by something, Ray was unconscious for a good minute or so. He then wakes up in one of Kyoko's rooms in her apartment. As she started to talk, her words were quite familiar to Ray. And at that moment, Ray finally realizes that the black-clothed goddess that Fujitang was talking about is actually Kyoko all along. According to Kyoko, she and Fujitang weren't really partners at first. She was only learning out of curiosity and personal interest. However, Fujitang did a great job. When she was conversing with him, he listened to whatever she said. Even though it harmed his art, he still offered her that. Ray immediately got angry, asking Kyoko what she meant by that. It seems like in order to complete her art, something important should not be missing. She then went on to show Ray the artwork she has been working on for quite some time now. This artwork is the same artwork Jonya saw her doing the last time he was alive. This is the art that's taken Kyoko's entire life to complete. A painting of a lake, but it's only painted in red and purple. Curious as to why? Well, it is because the theme of this painting is humanity. Since Ray couldn't really understand what Kyoko meant by that, Kyoko decided to explain everything to him instead. According to her, the boat drifting on the surface of a lake is the most suitable analogy for the whole of a person's life. Meanwhile, the surface of the lake and the boat drifting on the surface is a perfect match. The difference between a lake and a river is that a lake lacks current. So if the boat on top of the lake wants to float somewhere or try its hardest to reach the shore, or just drift aimlessly before sinking to the depths, the surrounding forest and sky, along with the sun, watch silently as the boat floats its course. To sum it up, this painting represents a human's life. But if that's all it was, then it'd just be a boring painting. That is why Kyoko decided to use a more creative material to draw this humanity. As it turns out, Kyoko actually uses the internal organs she and Fujitang got from their victims. This time around, to piss Ray off, Kyoko went on to show him Jonya's intestines. She was so casual about it that she just got it by opening one of her drawers. To even make Ray suffer, she went into full detail, stating that Fujitang did an impressive job peeling off Jonya's skin. According to her, even though he is a med school graduate, it's not something just anyone can pull off. But what really made Kyoko happy that day was when Jonya finally saw her. The expression on his face was so amusing that Kyoko wanted to rewind the events and witness it again. But the star of the show is definitely his lovely screams, as she terms it. All these revelations just made Ray sick. Even looking at Kyoko is hard for him to do now. Kyoko then moves closer to him, ordering him to look straight at her face. It seems like she badly wants Ray to observe her creative activities. At this point, the only question in Ray's mind is why. Why did it become like this? Even though he was happy for the first time in his life. But to think that all of those fun memories he shared with Kyoko were lies really broke Ray so much. All this time, he thought that the Spider Girl was the one doing all of these murders. But to think that the woman he loves is actually the culprit really made the whole situation even worse. Now the only question is, will Ray survive this predicament? Or will he be the next victim of this atrocious, merciless murderer?